presenter is Gregor Reese. He's Director and Principal Consultant for Indoor Environment and Risk Management Consultancy, Apera Group?
Apera.
Apera Group?
Yep.
Okay. Thought I got that right. He completed a Master's in Occupational Hygiene and Toxicology with ECU in 2018 and subsequently worked with Safe Work Australia's GHS harmonization program, specifically focused on health impacts of diesel engine emissions and welding fumes. Gregor presented papers at the AIOH 2018 conference on the topic of health risks of in-building sewage treatment systems, and the 2019 conference on the topic of cancer declarations by IARC and their impact on exposure standards. We thank Gregor for coming all the way from Australia, and Gregor, take it away.
Thank you very much. So Apera, just a bit of background and why I'm interested in this topic. Apera is the agent for a number of cleaning technologies in Australia. And as an occupational hygienist, my job is to make sure, do no harm and that there's a net benefit, that sort of thing. And you look at a lot of these technologies and it's a really confusing marketplace. If you go out there today in the hall, you'll see a number of different options. And look, this is an effort to sort of explore current know-how about some of the health risks with some of the technologies being employed. But I'm not a medical person, really, and I'm not dwelling on that. I'm really trying to create an evaluation framework for what's in the box. And in fact, there's a session after this one talking very much about standards, and I'm going to talk a little bit about how we compare apples with apples in this field. Well, right arrow. I'll do it manually. And the reason why I've travelled all this way is actually to come and say thank you. Can we get that work? Because most of the research done in this field is actually done in the US and published by US researchers. And I'm just going to put some acknowledgements up here. Oh, you got it working? Yeah, good stuff. So the first paper that caught my attention was this one by Collins and Farmer, Unintended Consequences of Air Chemistry. And then there was a great big tome put out in 2022, which I'll reference later. And there's Delphine Farmer again and Bill Banfleth, and there's some photos of them. And they pop up everywhere, basically. And then we've got the Shelley Miller, who's on the White House Task Force for Indoor Air Quality, who's got a lot to say about air cleaning technologies as well. And then a couple of other just general research sources that are fantastic. Ian Cull's IAQ Research of the Month. If you're not getting it, then get it, because it's really a wonderful overview of publications. And these guys are just awesome. And their interview with Bill, I can't, how do you say his last name? Banfleth? Sorry if I've butchered it, but that's another terrific resource in terms of just general what's going on with indoor air cleaning technology. So yeah, as I mentioned, Apera, the idea here today is not to say this one's good, this one's bad, and we're going to throw these guys under a bus. It's actually just to create sort of, get a bit of a nuanced feel for the technologies and what we know and what we don't know, more particularly around some of the health effects. So like I mentioned we're agent for Sanovox, so we like UV, but I'm not here to promote UV. We also just picked up an agency for a tank company doing vaporised hydrogen peroxide, which is like a fumigation, and that's for pharmaceuticals. So it's getting the idea that you use the right application for the right purpose. Also, the terminology around this is really confusing. So some people use air purifiers, some people use air cleaners. I think it's interchangeable. I noticed the ISO standards There's a standard out there on air purification. The newer standard being developed, they're calling them air cleaners, because they don't think that they're actually purifying. They're only meeting, it's not purifying. It sounds absolute and 100%. Their thinking is that air cleaning is a better term, because they might meet a log 6 kill, but it's not an absolute. And most air cleaners have some sort of filtration, HEPA. And then you've got what I'm calling add-on technologies. So UV, which is classified as photolytic, photocatalytic oxidation, and I'll go a little bit into depth. I'm not an engineer, but I'll use some pictures and try to keep it nice and simple. Ionising plasmas, which is sort of targeted around particulate matter, ozone generators, and then other fumigation fogging techniques. And people are out there telling you, I've been to a conference recently in Australia, and basically putting a chemical in the air, and it suppresses mould growth, and you're sort of wondering, well, what are the health effects of that? And I'll look at a little bit of that as well. So air cleaning technologies, I don't think it's a passing fad. I love this publication. This is actually I don't know who owns it, and I don't know how to reference it, but it's a sort of a collective publication on sustainable indoor air quality, done by a number of companies. Safe Traces is in there that we do know quite well. And they've got a 4-step process of, I suppose, you've got a building, what are you trying to achieve? Set some goals. The next process is an interesting one, because a lot of people then jump to, well, let's just improve ventilation, but they say, no, that's clean indoor air. And then they go on to optimising ventilation and validating, monitoring and controlling IAQ. So I like that document. It's fairly recent, and again, I'll recommend that one to you. There's a reference list to this that you can find all that. And in terms of cleaning indoor air, they talk around filtration, they talk around going to a MERV 13 level, and I'll touch on filtration a little bit today as well, because that's an important part of an air cleaning process. It's unusual to have an air cleaner that doesn't offer some sort of particulate matter filtration. And then, look, I've highlighted it here, but in their document, they also talk about germicidal UV irradiation, and that's where you've got spaces where you can't meet the air change targets. So they're also suggesting that, there's the add-on technologies have a place. And a lot of other people are suggesting that too. So what's going on? This is, and sorry, this is a cheap shot, but EPA in the US has been quite outspoken about ozone generators and their misuse, potential misuse. And I've had a lot of fun with this, because for a regulator to come out and say, look, we don't endorse this stuff, and we don't know whether it's safe or effective, that's quite strong language. And yeah, well, that's not to say that ozone generators don't have a place and a purpose, but obviously some folks have been marketing those into places where they're probably, it isn't optimal or not necessarily safe, if I can put it mildly. This is happening in Australia. We've got health authorities and the University of Melbourne just saying, just avoid units that have got any of the add-on technologies. So they've lumped ionisers, plasma, ozone, photocatalytic oxidation, precipitators, UV purification, and disinfecting add-ons. They just said just avoid it, which is sort of like a precautionary principle, but it's quite precautionary. So yeah, from our perspective is, well, what advice should people take? It's quite a confusing marketplace. I think anyone would admit it's a pretty confusing marketplace. And there's lots more examples of, and I'll talk more about what some of the governments are saying in different jurisdictions. So the question here today, are we throwing out those technologies into a bin? Are we throwing the baby out with the bathwater, to use a metaphor? So just going to do a quick overview of the different technologies, photolytic degradation. Now this is from Sanovox, and the benefits of UV light purification. This is the promise, it's no VOCs, chemicals or ozone, in terms of it doesn't generate any, helps reduce odours, mould, bacteria and viruses, helps improve respiratory health, helps protect against airborne pathogens, helps reduce symptoms of illness. You can read the rest. It's an old technology. It's been around since the 40s, and it's been used a long time. But looking at the research saying, well, if you have VOCs going through these systems that have UV, you do have a possibility of secondary chemistry occurring. And this is from a couple of different references. There's Collins and Farmer again. Yeah, but basically talking about secondary organic aerosols that can actually be hazardous to health, to put it mildly. And the chemistry around this gets really complicated, and I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. We're not going to do a chemistry lesson today, but just understand that what happens, you get VOCs passing through UV light, and it changes the chemistry of the VOC. And UV light's even used for odour control. They have a higher energy UVV light that comes out, and it works directly on the molecule and breaks it down, but in doing so, it doesn't necessarily lead to carbon dioxide and water. It doesn't have enough time necessarily when it transits, and you can get all sorts of different secondary molecules coming out from that. And that's actually a feature of all these electric cleaners. They all do this to some extent or other. Photocatalytic oxidation, and this is fundamentally around the hydroxyl radicals, OH, being formed within a contained chamber. You've got a pointer here? I do. The nasties coming in here. You've got a UV lamp. The UV lamp, this is different UV technology, but the UV lamp hits a titanium oxide layer, which creates these hydroxyl radicals, which magically, beautifully destructs all bacteria and pollutants, and you'll end up with CO2 and water. And look, there's a little bit of cynicism around the marketing from me. You'll hear a little bit of, in a perfect world, this is what happens, but we don't live in a perfect world, and that's not necessarily what happens. And again, this is Collins and Farmer. This technology produces an array of unintended byproducts depending on the composition of air flowing through the device, and includes aldehydes, phosgene, and chlorinated VOCs. I don't have enough toxicology to tell you whether those things are good for you, but I don't think so. Certainly not phosgene. Ozone generators, the promise is for reduce of unwanted scents and odours in cars, leisure boats, motorhomes, caravans, hotels, rooms, and much more. And it gets into spaces where other cleaners can't necessarily get, such as AC air ducts. Again, I mentioned the EPA. I think that's the same quote from earlier. But it's also Canada has had issues with ozone, and apparently are harder on ozone up in Canada than the US on ozone generators. And the language again is really, sorry to the ozone generator sellers in the room, but this is pretty entertaining stuff when when your regulators are saying that using language out that without substantiation, sound scientists and makers assert that can be beneficial to human health, actually exposure to ozone, which I don't think is the case. And again, ASHRAE prohibits the use of ozone generators. Now, I don't know whether that's a blanket restriction or recommendation from ASHRAE, but they're not great fans. They're not into putting a dose of ozone into the breathing space of people to make them have a healthy outcome. Ionisers, plasma air cleaners, and largely around particulate matter removal. And you've got the allergens dust, so suspended particulates up here going through a charged ion wave generator, but essentially it charges the particles and they dissipate out and you end up with clean air. Just fabulous. It doesn't actually get rid of the particulates generally, so they can be resuspended. And again, it's just, I'm quoting that one publication primarily, but there's Collins and Farmer, efficacy of ionisers for particulate matter removal in realistic environments is poorly understood. And then some of the systems you can get NOx and ozone being generated from the outflow air. So again, you get this sense that, well, do we really know what, what's coming out of the out air? And then you've got other fogging products and enzymes, which, I mean, I've got no idea what this stuff is, because they don't tell you. And so you're sort of thinking you'd like to go and look at the safety data sheet to figure out, well, what's in there, what's the active? Oh, that's proprietary, we can't tell you. Okay, righto. But it's, and I'm sorry, again, if these guys are here, but the language is interesting. It's all natural, generally regarded as safe by the FDA, USDA. This is, Tommy, yeah, naturally powerful part. This is using hydrogen peroxide. And the word natural, should immediately make you pause and sort of stop and ask questions. So again, the research on typically chlorinated cleaning products is that you do have respiratory health problems with chlorinated cleaning products. And I mean, there are exposure standards for ozone, and there's exposure standards for hydrogen peroxide as well. Air cleansing chemicals and any semi-volatile organics present in the formulations are introduced to indoor air will deposit or partition on surfaces. I mean, again, the large publication there that Bill Bamfleth was involved in talks a lot about chemical partitioning and the fact that a lot of these chemicals don't just disappear like an ozone or hydroxyl, but a lot of like chlorine, so they actually will stay in the environment and can be disturbed, and then they're back into your breathing zone. Depending on the partitioning coefficients, these could have a removal timescales from days to decades with typical air change rates. So, yeah, sort of pause for thought. So why don't we just stick with mechanical filtration? I mean, I've heard, certainly in Australia, a lot of people have said, well, just use HEPAs, because they do everything the other what do you need all the add-ons for? And this is a pretty well-known diagram, and I think this must be the diagram for the ASHRAE recommendation for the MERV 13 minimum general filtration standard for general air conditioning. So just, yeah, two axes. This is the cost of operation, and this is a really interesting stat that they measured, and it's a 2013 paper, but it's still, you still see it popping up everywhere. This is the mean relative risk of infection. So as you're going down from a MERV 4 to a MERV 7 to MERV 13, your relative risk of infection is dropping beautifully. But then after MERV 13 or 14, it starts to get really expensive because your pressure drops and the cost of running these systems. So once you're up at a HEPA, it's costing nearly $350 annualised cost, and I'm not sure what the metric is, but you get the idea that it's costing more than double what a MERV 13, and that's an issue for building owners and or anyone else. It's just energy costs, and that issue is not going away. And I've put WA Health here because these are people saying, "Oh, just filter." Then you've got the sort of your lab-based experiments that show, well, this should have a reduction in pathogens and you should have health outcomes, good health outcomes. But then you've got actually some studies that, this is a terrific study done in Boston Hospital, where they separated wards, and some of the wards had HEPA only, and some of the other wards had HEPA plus this. I think it's basically germicidal, it's UVGI plus some VOC filtration. So it was an advanced air treatment system. And yeah, I mean, in summary, so you had over 1,000 patients in the study, Zone A and Zone B patients. Zone A had the UV treatment, so they've both got HEPA filtration. And sorry, it's a bit of a complicated diagram, but the paper, this is my diagram because the paper described this in words and it was impossible to understand really until you do a diagram. But essentially, Zone A and Zone B, the air was mixed back through, and that was the recirculated air. Zone C patients was a control group that had just HEPA filtration. And then you're getting some really remarkable outcomes in terms of reductions of pathogens on surfaces, reduction in hospital stay, length of stay, and reduction in hospital charges, which I thought was interesting that they went to that extent. Look, it's only one study, but there's actually a real lack of studies showing how these things work and how there's a number of air cleaners out there that you wish that they could just pick 2 wards and pop an air cleaner in there with the active technology and the air cleaner there without the active technology. And I can hear the ethics committees saying this probably won't get through ethics approval, but these studies should be done, and they should be done to prove that some of these technologies work. And the reason they do have an effect, and that's another pretty famous diagram you see everywhere, it's the most penetrating particle size for filters. There's your 99.7, which is a HEPA grade, but it's at around 0.2, 0.3 microns that you actually get quite a lot of penetration particulates. So it's not being captured, the particulates, and that's generally, it's in the virus range, but also bacteria over that size. So you do, HEPAs aren't the be-all and end-all, and HEPAs use a lot of energy to run air through HEPAs. So, yeah, my argument is that we're going to see more and more air cleaning technology, so we better start dealing with it. This diagram, it's actually my diagram, but it's basically a classification of different sort of air cleaners from the 2022 the large study. And just to try to break things up, you've got the mechanical, which is your filtration, physical removal using MERV HEPA filters. Then you've got your chemical, they call them chemical systems, but basically electronic air cleaning technology. So you've got your UV, they call it photolytic, and it's a targeted reaction. So, I mean, UV is quite effective on pathogens. It's been studied for over 50 years, actually over 100 years. And the dose rates are known for pathogens, how much energy, how much UV you need on a pathogen to make sure that it can't reproduce. It's not killing the pathogen necessarily, but it makes sure the DNA is damaged enough so you don't get reproduction. And then you've got the whole group here, the contained, again, that's a definition. It's basically your portable, portable air cleaners. And it's supposed to be a confined reaction, and it includes photocatalysis, ionizers and plasmas, which we briefly covered. And then you've got your additive, which is adding something to the general air where people may or may not be, which is like your fogging. So your ozone, peroxide, chlorine dioxide, and those sort of methods. And essentially, this is my thinking. Essentially, as you go down this tree, you're actually dealing with a higher risk, and you need a higher level of proof, I suppose, to show that this won't have a harmful effect on folks, on people using a space. These categories, again, they're the same categories from the previous slide. So, and again, I'm looking for, well, what are other people saying? What are other sort of people saying about air cleaning and air cleaning technologies? And it's really interesting what they say in a press conference, or what they say at a conference, and then what they actually publish. And they're much more conservative around what they publish, which leaves us with a real lack of guidance on, well, how do we evaluate this technology or that ozone generator out there in the hall. But certainly, look, ASHRAE, they're obviously well into filtration. They like their filtration. They're also, and just based on their guidance, they've got two of their chapters in their handbooks specifically on UV, and so that, in my terms, suggests that they're not promoting UV, but it's an accepted technology, and they're they support that. Really don't know what their view is on that, and I think the jury's still out on a lot of the other confined reactions. and more technologies keep springing up. So more and more technologies keep springing up in this box. So I don't know how the regulators or even advisory bodies like ASHRAE are going to keep up, but I know there's a new task force to help to do that. And then certainly ASHRAE, not a fan of ozone, and have said so publicly. Morawska, that's our Australian Lydia Morawska. So she was one of the 2 scientists that got the whole COVID is airborne through to the World Health Organization. She was one of the original aerosol specialists. So that's been her area of study for decades. And it's her and I think a US colleague got a band of them together to say, no, stop cleaning surfaces. COVID's airborne. So she's a bit of a champion. And she's recently at a HVAC conference in Melbourne, giving strong endorsement, obviously, to filtration, air cleaning technology, giving strong endorsement for UV technology. Jury out. She's actually got funding now. I think they got $30 million, 30 million Australian. She's got a centre of excellence up in Brisbane studying indoor air quality. It's basically an indoor air quality centre of excellence. So that's going to be good. We'll actually hopefully have some more publications up here to offer when we come back on our next visit. NIOSH put out their 2009 guide on upper air UV. So they're on board with that. And that was, I think that was because they used to control tuberculosis in hospitals back in the 50s with upper air UV. And then people stopped using it for whatever reason. And really the technology was falling out of fashion, if you like. And then they started to get tuberculosis spreading in hospitals again. I'm not sure whether that was in the US, but I think that's the driver for that publication. This is CARB. That's the, California. Okay. So they're not really endorsing something, but they certainly give the tick of approval to technologies sitting in this bucket and this bucket. I think that should be PPB, but yeah, basically again they're not a fan of ozone and sort of ozone exposure. And Miller, she was again, this is the White House Task Force, and this is really from the press conference. They spoke for some 3 hours, but it was a really fascinating discussion. If you didn't catch that, then that's the Indoor Air Quality, White House Indoor Air Quality Initiative. Again, endorsing filtration. Also, she was quite a promoter of UV. So, and I hope the next session answers this question, is that how do we actually compare these things? And there's currently, in terms of efficacy, in terms of power consumption, and in terms of, how much comes out the back end of the process. And this came out. I'm on the Australian Standards Filter Committee, which is linked to the ISO Standards Filter Committee. It's the ME80 committee. And this is a new standard coming out specifically looking at comparing air cleaning technologies and benchmarking air cleaning technologies. And this, I hope there's someone in the room that knows more about this, because I got excited when I read this, because there's a currently ISO 16000 standard which supposedly allows you to compare air cleaning technologies, but it's completely generic and it's lacking in detail. This standard, and it's being developed by these guys, IEC, DPAS, it's really specific on how you test the air cleaner, what sort of clean room you use, what sort of biological indicators you use. And I'm really excited. And so this is in draft form, and this is going to be something we can hopefully use to start comparing the performance of air cleaners in the future. It specifically covers off on ozone emissions out the back end. So you must tell us what residual ozone there might be from that air cleaning process. And it also, hydrogen peroxide is the other one that they specifically mentioned. You must tell us what it's generating out the back end in terms of a residual. So I'm excited by that one. Yeah. So, look, I'm no expert. You probably gathered that. But I like the idea of applying a precautionary principle when we're popping these air cleaners in our classrooms and schools or hospitals or aged care facilities. At the moment, I think it's fair to say it's really impossible for most of the technologies to compare one with the other. If one consumes more power per, cubic metre of clean air delivery, it won't mention that in their promotional brochures, and that's the nature of they promise a lot. Anyway, assuming they do work, what are the actual health benefits versus the health risks? So it's actually a two-sided coin. They may well, and I'm pretty sure most of these technologies do kill COVID, will remove 80, 90% or whatever log you like of the disease. That's fairly easily tested and shown in a lab condition. Don't know how it's going to work in the real world or for how long. But what are the downsides? What are the downsides of whatever is coming out the back end? What's your airstream coming in specifically? If you've got a high level of VOCs coming in, your air intake, what's your chemistry coming out? And that's a complicated question, but it's something to evaluate when you think about it. I think we can say HEPA cleaners improve air environment. So if we had a couple of portable HEPA air cleaners here, it would remove particulates, it would remove, it would improve the air quality in here. It's not going to add any oxygen, but yeah. I think thumbs up for HEPA or similar filtration technology. That's a no-brainer. And in fact, when you go around, certainly in the Australian context, when I go around offices, schools, that sort of thing, that's the technology I see. And yeah, the University of Melbourne has a lovely website looking at just filters, HEPA filters, portable air cleaner with HEPAs, and looking at their costs, cost of purchase versus cost of operation, and basically dollars per cubic metre cleaned. And it's a really nice tool for bang for your buck for HEPA cleaners. And this is carefully worded. Well-designed electronic air cleaning technology can have major health benefits. So just recognising that there's a major upside here, but we've got to be careful how we get there. Terrific reference list. Can I recommend this to you all if you want to learn more about air cleaning? And thank you to the US publications. They've been really, the research's been led here in the States, and it's been fantastic.